What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck of the Day. Today we're profiling Code Talkers. With Ghost from the Past second haunting, we finally got the Code Talker Hit Soul, and now the deck has opened up to a whole new playstyle because up until now, Code Talkers were always this super explosive combo deck that was attempting to extra link your opponent and give them Ibli and they wouldn't be able to do anything. The problem with that kind of strategy was that you just put all your eggs in the same basket. If your opponent just stopped you in some way or form, then you pretty much had nothing else and you were at the mercy of your opponent comboing and OTKing you. But now the deck can actually utilize a control type playstyle, so you can kind of pick the way you want to play the deck, which for this video we're going to focus more on the Heat Soul draw control deck, which the best way to describe this deck is I feel like it's a modern volcanic deck. It's a deck that keeps drawing cards and it basically tries to outpace your opponent with resources and basically simplify the game state as much as possible and then go for one final push. So I prefer this playstyle a lot more than the combo for this deck. So now, before we begin with the video, if you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So starting off the monsters, we have 3 copies of Lady Debug. This is the best normal summon of the deck. You summon her, you search a level 3 or lower Cyberse monsters, you have your cards that can be used as link material from your hand for your Code Talkers. This deck can play around hand drops very well, because the thing is, there is not a correct way to hand drop this deck, because the only hand drop that really hurts this deck is Ghost Ogre. When you Ghost Ogre Lady Debug, that can hurt a lot, but any other hand drop can be deemed very redundant because you do have a lot of cards that can be used either from the hand as link material or to search those cards that can be used from the hand as link material. So it's very difficult to hand drop this deck correctly, which is why I love it, because there is only a few options that you can use against this deck to hand drop them, and they're usually very early. But when you're playing against the combo version, a well-timed hand drop maybe in the middle of the combo can hurt you a lot because you were relying on a lot of other cards as well. So this is why this deck just plays around hand drops very well and can also fit in a lot of hand drops to be able to play better going second as well. And Lady Debug is the one card starter that can get you to a combo, is the one card access code that you can use going second to basically destroy your opponent, so she can do pretty much everything. The other normal summon of the deck is 3 copies of Cyberse Gadget. This card is better during the late game because during the early game you are not going to use its effect to summon a level 2 or lower monster from the graveyard, but it's still a good card to summon early game if you don't have access to Debug, because it gives you a token so you can basically get a free link 2 and then you can summon your Code Talker inverted, which will special summon another monster from the hand if you don't have one of the monsters that you can use from the hand as link material. So you can do plays with this card as well. It's not as good as Debug, but it's another monster that can be used similarly to Debug, so we need to play more monsters because just 3 normal summons were not going to be enough, so we need to play just a bit more. Now for the monsters that you can use from the hand as link material, first of all we have 3 copies of Microcoder. This card you can use from the hand, and when it's used from the hand as link material for a Code Talker monster, you can add a Sinus Spell and Trap from your deck to your hand. We only play 2 Sinus Spells and Traps. You don't play the continuous card that keeps giving you more cards the more you link climb. That's not what this deck is about. You play cards that either get you to more plays just once to extend with 1 play, or you get to the counter trap if you already have the cards and you need to combo off in your hand, so you can basically get another layer of protection, which is why this deck is very simple. It's very easy to pick up. It's nothing super combo-ish that you need to learn a lot of lines in order to be able to play this deck efficiently. So yeah, this card gives you access to the cards you need. We have 3 copies of Code Generator. This is similar to Microcoder. Its effect that when it's used for link material, it basically dumps a Cyberse monster from the deck to the graveyard, and you know that we play Dodgescaper in the deck because Dodgescaper is such a good card, so we send it to the graveyard with Code Generator to basically get another free monster on the field. So the deck does have a couple extenders that keep getting monsters on the field, 1 monster at a time, and this is what you want. Your end board is nothing special. You just end with Transcode Talker and Heat Soul under, so you basically have 2 2800 beaters that are both untargetable and that they keep giving you more cards every turn. And if your opponent doesn't deal with it right away, then this deck can basically overwhelm you really fast because you keep drawing cards, 1 during your own turn and 1 during your opponent's turn. So as long as you keep drawing cards that you can use, maybe like hand drops or staple other cards that we play, then you basically control the tempo of the game. And as long as you simplify the game state fast enough, then you can just summon access code and push for game with 1 final push. Now for some one-offs, we play 1 copy of Code Exporter. This is another card that you can use from the hand. The only thing about this card is that it's not something that it gives you something for this turn specifically. What this card does is that if it's used as link material for a Code Talker, you basically add a level 4 lower Cyberse monster from your graveyard to your hand. And this effect, while not the most optimal thing to use when you're trying to combo off, it's a card that can give you follow-up, which is important too, because you're not going to destroy your opponent right away with an extra link. You need a card in your hand in order to be able to play next turn, especially if your board gets broken. So being able to add Debug from the graveyard after you use her effect, have her for the following turn, means that your opponent knows that there's a threat for that access code, because Debug does have the 1 card access code line. So you basically make sure you can make sure that your opponent either finishes you off, or they make a big board, or they know that they're going to get OTK'd next turn. So this is why this card basically gives you something to pressure your opponent, because if they know that if they just deal with your board and you don't have anything else unless you top deck it, then it's not the most consistent thing in the world. We play one copy of Dotscaper. Of course, I mentioned that you can send this card with Code Generator to basically get another free body on the field. And we do play one copy of Backup Secretary. It's a monster you can search with Silent Mining, so you can have another body on the field. There will be some scenarios where she's good. It's not the card that you really want to see in your hand because she does nothing on her own, but as an extender, it's a really good card. Now, let's get to everyone's favorite part of any deck, the hand traps. And yes, you can expect to see a lot of hand traps in a deck like this. I mentioned it's a modern Volcanic deck, and Volcanics used to play a lot of traps in order to be able to control the pace of the game. Now, traps are very slow, unless they're searchable in this day and age, but hand traps, they're really good, especially when you can draw them during your opponent's turn as well. You can use them that turn because you will not be able to activate traps if you draw them during your opponent's turn. So we play 3 copies of Ash Blossom. Of course, it's the most generic hand trap. We have to play Ash. With Branded Fusion being everywhere, being able to negate that is very, very crucial. 3 copies of Effect Veiler. Now, I am maxing out on the hand traps that you can use during your opponent's turn if you draw them on that turn, which that makes Veiler better than Imperm, because Imperm, if you draw it during your opponent's turn with Heat Soul, you are not going to be able to activate it because you do have cards on the field. So monster hand traps are more important for this deck. Of course, I do play Imperm, but I'm not maxing it out, so that's why I prefer to max Veiler over Imperm in this particular deck. We play 3 copies of Ghost Build. This card is amazing. Being able to store cards like Branded in red means that you can basically negate your opponent's entire play with Guardian Chimera and Ad Libitum, so this card's amazing. 3 copies of Ghost Ogre. As long as the adventure package is a thing, this card is going to remain relevant. As long as Konami deals with the adventure package efficiently in the ban list, maybe the next one or the one after, then Ghost Ogre is going to lose its value. But for now, I feel like it's a really good card, because if you don't have this card, then that means that the rest of your hand traps in their hand, at least one of them, is going to be dead as well. So being able to combo this with another hand trap is usually the way to go against the adventure package. And we play 2 copies of Imperm. Again, I'm playing only 2 because Imper is a great card, but the thing is, you don't want to draw this with Heat Soul during your opponent's turn. So if you're going first, you want to set this, and if you're going second, and if you draw this during your opponent's turn and you draw it, then tough luck, it's not the card that you can use, but you can use it for the next turn. So this is why you want to minimize your chances of drawing this with Heat Soul during your opponent's turn, which is why I'm not maxing it out. Now, for the Signet Spells and Traps, first of all, we have 3 copies of Signet Mining. This card searches you basically your entire deck. You can get your starters, you can get your extenders. It's an amazing card that you can search with Microcoder. But if you don't need an extender, then the card you're going to be searching is one of the 2 copies of Signet Conflict. This is the Infernity Barrier of the deck. When your opponent activates a spell, trap, or monster effect while you control a code token, you negate the activation, you banish that card, and then your opponent cannot activate cards or effects with the same name as the card that was banished until the end of the turn. So not only does this card make sure that you can play around cards, but for example, when you're activating a card that negates activations against cards that your opponent can activate again if their activation gets negated, then sometimes you can be a little bit reluctant on whether you want to use it or not. For example, when you're negating Rite of Aramazir with a Solemn Judgment, if your opponent does have a second copy, or if they have the Water Enchantress to search the second copy, they can activate it again. But when you activate this card and you banish that Rite of Aramazir, even if your opponent has more copies in their hand, they will not be able to activate them. So that's a very good effect this card has, which basically makes sure that even if your opponent has drawn the nuts and they can play around cards like this, then this particular counter trap will make sure that your opponent will not be able to do as much as they would in other matchups. And we do play some staples. We play 3 copies of Forbidden Droplet. If you can afford this card, it's amazing. This deck only needs 1 debug in order to be able to play, so you don't really care no matter how many monsters you have to negate. And this deck struggles against super combo decks. It's very good against control decks. It can outpace even Sky Striker in the right scenarios, and being able to be untargetable with Transcode Talker means that in control matchups, you're going to have the upper hand. But against combo decks going second, and if your hand drops are not enough, then you need a card like this in order to be able to play, because breaking a board that doesn't do anything is not very difficult with Access Code Talker. It's the thing that you don't have ways to push through many boards, so this is why Droplet is a really good card for this deck. But again, if you don't have access to it, Forbidden Chalice is a good alternative. It's not as powerful, but it's still a great card as well. We play 2 copies of Triple Tactics Talent. Now, the reason I am not maxing out on this card is because there are a lot of branded decks out there right now that play 0 hand traps. And the thing is, when you know that your opponent will play hand traps in a format, then yes, maxing out on this card is obviously the correct option, because it's always going to be live. But when there are people out there that don't play hand traps because they think they're a low value and they'd rather play more extenders in the deck to try to push through boards and hand traps as well, then that means that Triple Tactics Talent going first sometimes is going to be dead. So that's when you really don't want to draw multiple copies of this card, because you're going to have dead hands this way. So I'm playing 2. You can side the third one if you know that your opponent plays hand traps, but still, in the main deck, I feel like main decking 3 of this card in a deck that wants to go first, it's not the correct call, so I'm playing only 2 for that. And we play 1 copy of Called by the Grave because, again, Called by is broken, you stop a hand trap and you combo. For the extra deck, first we have the new MVP of the deck. We have 2 copies of Decode Talker Heat Soul. This card is amazing. So basically, by paying 1,000 life points as a quick effect, you can draw a card during both turns. And it has an effect that if you do this and your life points are 2,000 or less, you can banish this from the field and special summon link 3 or lower Cyberse monster from your extra deck. So this can come up during the super late game when you have used this effect so much that you have all the advantage. You can basically give up on this card and summon an update jammer from your extra deck, and this means that you will be able to OTK with either Avramax or Access Code. But yeah, this card giving you constant draws is absolutely amazing. This deck basically has 2 different playstyles just because of this card's existence, and I absolutely love it. We play 2 copies of Transcode Talker. This is the monster that you want to accompany Heat Soul every single time on the field. You basically summon this and then you summon Heat Soul under it. You have 2 monsters that are big beaters that cannot be targeted, which means that you have really good control matchups, especially against decks like Sky Striker, which they cannot deal with untargetable monsters very easily. And yeah, as long as these 2 stick on the field and you keep getting more draws, you're going to win most of the time just because you can always link Climb into Access Code and OTK your opponent. For the link ones, we play 1 copy of Linguribo. This is a really good card against trap decks, and in any Cyberse deck, I feel like this card is really good. Even Salaman Great players are playing it just because you never know when you're going to run into this one matchup that plays traps. Eldritch is a popular enough deck, I would say, so I feel like this card can get a lot of value against decks like this because you need to be able to negate cards like Skill Drain because the deck does not have anything to do under Skill Drain. You basically can't do anything, so this card, being able to summon it early means that you will have a free pass against a card like this. We play 1 copy of Link Disciple. This is a card that if you have redundant monsters on the field, you can basically tribute them to try to cycle a card in your hand to see another card, because you will see a lot of multiple cards that you don't want in your hand with this deck because you do play so many 3-ofs being either real cards or hand traps, so you will see cards that you won't be able to use. So this card can basically help you dig into a different kind of card that you can use. We play 1 copy of Link Spider. This is here to link off the token that you get with Cyberse Gadget because Access Code needs effect monsters, so sometimes you're going to be able to get to this 1 extra monster on the field with a Cyberse Gadget's effect to give you the token, and then you can link into Link Spider to go for Access Code this way. We play 2 copies of Code Talker. This is a monster that you're going to summoning most of the time with the microcoders and the code generators because it's a monster that you can just bring back with your Transcode Talker that then will be co-linked because it has the up and down link arrows, so you can get the boost and the untarget ability. But sometimes you will be summoning this 1 copy of Code Talker inverted instead because it's basically an extender. So if this card is link summoned, you special summon a Cyberse monster from your hand to a zone that this card points to. It doesn't have the zones that help you go into the Transcode Talker play because it points left and right, and it's not a card that you can summon in the extra monster zone, which is what sucks about this card. The thing is, if this card was pointing to one of the main monster zones, if it was pointing to the extra monster zone, it would be really, really good, but still, it's a card that you can summon basically in the middle of your combo after you've done some stuff, and it basically gives you another free special from your hand if you cannot summon it. And this is the only way you can use cards like Microcoder and Code Generator. If you have them in your hand in multiple copies, you will use the first one from your hand with its own effect, and then you will summon the second one with this card to basically get a free link climb on the field. We play 1 copy of Splash Mage. Of course, this card's a staple in Cyberse decks, basically giving you a mass from the graveyard. 1 copy of Update Jammer. This card is the OTK machine in combination with Access Code. You basically get a 53k beater that can attack twice and also destroy your opponent's entire board. This card is absolutely amazing, and in any deck that can summon it, we're gonna use it. We play 1 copy of Security Dragon. This is a going second card. It's not a card that comes up too often, but there are some scenarios that this card can potentially deal with a monster that you can't deal before you summon an Access Code or an Avramax. So it's a decent link to play. It's not the extra deck, it's too tight, so you can play cards like this that basically help you deal with niche scenarios. And for the link force, we play of course the 1 copy of Access Code. This is the game ender of all your games, but there will be some times that this card either is going to get stopped or it's not going to be able to OTK, which is why we need to play the 1 copy of Avramax as well, because not only is this card going to be your backup play to push for a game if Access Code fails, but also against some matchups Avramax is very difficult to deal with, so it's even worth summoning early in order to make sure that you don't lose to a certain deck. So yep, that's the deck guys. Code Talkers now have 2 different ways of playing, so no matter what kind of player you are, if you enjoy combo decks or if you enjoy control decks but you're a fan of Cyberse monsters, now you can rejoice because you can pick your own playstyle that you love and enjoy, and both are very, very good. Personally, I prefer this one. I feel like it's more competitive just because of the way that the deck can be built with more hand traps and more staples, and that it doesn't lose to hand traps on its own. So yeah, I feel like this build is a little bit more competitive than the combo deck, but the combo deck is the one that gives you more free wins, so pick the one you choose. So yep, that's the deck guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.